So, welcome back, everyone. And here we are again in the program of Bioethics, Master of Science in Bioethics at St. Thomas University, and the course on the bioethical issues at the end of human life, and today's lecture on consent. Consent and some of the aspects involved, some of the major aspects involved in consent today, from the bioethical perspective, of course. So as always, we begin with a little prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Blessed Trinity, we love you, we adore you, and we thank you for all your many blessings, for the gift of life, for having us back together, for all the many blessings in Thanksgiving for the second International Conference on Climate, Nature, and Society that we just concluded here at St. Thomas University with great speakers and representation. May we be able to move forward your gospel of life, your good news of human life as we seek to interact in a positive way with the life that surrounds us in nature, the environment, as we focus on these bioethical issues at the end of human life. We continue to ask your inspiration to be able to address these challenging issues at the end of human life, that we may be able to do it with dignity, with sanctity, follow your divine will in this transition at the end of human life here on earth into eternal life in union with you, Blessed Trinity, as the beatific vision, in union with you for all eternity, which is really our greatest honor and glory, to be with you for all eternity. We ask your blessing upon our lecture today, that we may be ever more aware of your presence within us and among us. In a special way, during this Lenten season, we pray for those people who are in most need of your divine mercy at this time. We ask this in the name of Christ our Lord. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay, so today we're going to look at the whole issue of consent. We're going to look also at advanced directives, which typically includes a package of a living will, power of attorney, and DNR orders, do not resuscitate. Okay? And then after the break, we'll look at two contemporary challenging issues, POST and MOST. Physician orders for life-sustaining treatment. We'll get into it. Physician orders for life-sustaining treatment, or medical orders for life-sustaining treatment. And we'll look at the nuances involved here. And this is still questione disputate. These are still up for grabs, if you will, bioethically from the Catholic perspective. The magisterium has not made a definitive statement on this. So we can go either way on it, yes or no, depending. Mostly I'll focus on distinctions, making distinctions to help us decide eventually to say yes or no to POST or MOST. Again, bioethically speaking, at the end of human life. Typically in a clinical setting, the person is dying, the patient is dying. All right, so with regards to consent, and sorry for not asking earlier, again, if ever there's a question or a comment, stop me along the way. Oh yes, I have not had a chance to grade your summaries, I'm sorry about that. So, next Monday, Wednesday, you'll get the grading of both, hopefully, okay? I mean, by next Saturday. All right, so we're going to look at the ERDs, the Ethical and Religious Directives, for guidance here, which we have good guidance. And just to recall that little document, as you know, is the 2018 edition from last year. Have you all been able to get it? Yes, okay. Either physically or online. There's an access to it right there. And it's also a great resource. I don't know if you've had time to look into it, but do get into it and start reading it. It's not long, as you know. It's nice and slim. The physical version fits into a pocket. We have it in Spanish, in English and in Spanish. It's been translated here. And just to recap, I think I did a little introduction of it, did I not?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So to recap, we go into the 6 parts, which are mini chapters, really. Each part is only about 2 pages, 2-3 pages, right? Mini chapters. Part 5 is issues at the end of life. Part 4 is the issues at the beginning of life. So we're now concentrating on the end of life. Page 20 on the little booklet, so we can go there. And each of these parts, each one of these mini chapters is subdivided into 2 sections. The first section is always an introduction, several paragraphs, typically 1 page, stating the basic principles that apply either at the beginning of life, at the end of life, in the doctor-patient relationship, professional-patient relationship, right? And so on. So that's the introduction, it's the first section. And then the second section of that mini chapter is what we call directives. Each directive is typically a single paragraph, and it focuses on one particular issue. So it really breaks it down to individual issues, all right? It turns out there are a total of 6 directives that apply to consent in this area. 4 of them apply to individual consent, and then 2 more specifically to proxy consent. In other words, consenting on behalf of someone else that is incapacitated at the moment. All right, so a total of 6. 4 of them are going to come from this section, from end of life, and 2 are more general, that are going to come from the doctor-patient relationship, which is part 3, or mini chapter number 3. At any rate, each one of these directives has a number, specific number. So they go from number 1 all the way to, in the first part, all the way to number 72, I think it is, or 74 on part 6, okay? Let's see which one is the last number. 77. 77 in the new version. So there are a few more paragraphs. So 1 to 77 spread out in the 6 parts. Then at the very end is all the references, the reference numbers. So I've pulled them out individually, and we refer to the document as ERD, Ethical and Religious Directives, ERD, and then the number is just the paragraph number. So that's ERD 28, 27, 26, 59. These are the 4 that refer to consent. The 2 main characteristics of consent, the 2 main characteristics, free and informed, free and informed. So if we think about that a little bit, functionally, remember anything from Dr. Father Chaffee? Think functionally, right? Throughout the whole program, think functionally, because typically what we experience with our senses, we're looking at structures. This machine is a computer, but that's the structure. What does it do? It connects me to the interworld, to the internet, which means it connects me to the world, to the underworld. So functionally, very important. Free, functionally, when you think about it in a doctor-patient relationship, it does not mean, yes, doctor, whatever you say, whether I need to sign. That's not free. That's acquiescent. That's the patient throwing her or his responsibility onto the doctor. Unfair for the doctor, you know. The doctor says, no, you decide. I'm telling you the facts. So how is the person going to decide? Informed, okay? So you see, free and informed. It's the interaction, okay? It's the interaction. but the patient needs to consent freely. And therefore, while the patient is still sound of mind in general, but even sound of mind, most lay people, 99.999% of lay people, do not really know medical clinical terms. So it's on the part of the doctor now, the responsibility on the part of the doctor to convey the information in a way that the patient is able to understand at least the cause of the illness, and that's why the diagnosis is so important. It's pivotal. The diagnosis is critical so that the doctor can now explain to the patient what is the protocol, what is the prognosis. The prognosis will flow out of the diagnosis, right? But the patient doesn't really know that. Those are technical things that are the competence of the medical professional. Doesn't have to be the doctor necessarily. It could be a nurse or a nurse practitioner. In some cases, it's the pharmacist, because now pharmacists also do consultation, right? When you go to the drugstore, there's a window for consultation. So that's why we say the healthcare professional. Okay, so the patient needs to consent freely. And in order to do that, the patient needs to be informed. So you see that interaction, and that's why the doctor-patient relationship is a previous chapter. Before we get it's chapter 3 or part 3 on the document, before we get into the beginning and end of life issues. Okay, that said then, you notice that I rearranged the order a little bit, just giving the priority to the patient first. So this number 28 refers to the patient. Each person or the person's surrogate should have access to medical and moral information and counseling so as to be able to form his or her conscience. The free and informed healthcare decision of the person or person's surrogate is to be followed, so long as it doesn't contradict Catholic principles. Okay, so you see there's a lot packed into this little paragraph. Let's open it up a little bit, and the others will kind of flow from here. So it is a patient's rights, access to not only medical, but moral information also with regards to the patient. This is looking at what we call a holistic view of the human person. Holistic meaning body, mind, and soul one. That integration of what makes us fully human, right? So it's not just the clinical aspect, it's also the moral, ethical aspect, because the person is forming the conscience. And from the conscience will flow, not just the intellect, but the conscience, will flow that decision of yay, nay, I want to submit to this treatment, or no, thank you, let me die in peace. Okay? All right. So that access, it flows from patient rights, but it is an access that includes the moral, so that engages the pastoral care team. Because the doctor may not be a Catholic doctor in a Catholic hospital. But that doctor or that nurse or pharmacist has to be respectful of the Catholic values, right? So they can practice the medicine, but within the parameters of Catholic teaching. So there will not be access to contraceptive sterilization or contraception, certainly obviously not abortion or in vitro fertilization at the beginning of life. At the end of life, no access to physician-assisted suicide, which is really the core of this course, is this whole growing issue of physician-assisted suicide, which we saw last class, right? All right. Now, the free and informed consent, oh yeah, we saw that. This is the patient right to information, medical and moral. The counterpart is going to be number 27. That's why I reverted the order, because remember, the ERDs are written for Catholic healthcare institutions, all right? So it's going to be our Catholic healthcare services, but it's from the institutional side. So when we read the ERDS at an individual level, either as a practitioner or as a patient, we have to translate from the institution to the individual, all right? And that's what the order of priorities is a little different, slightly, but they're very adaptable to the individual level of either the practitioner or the patient. So this one, the counterpart, number 27, bless you, is on the part, the onus or the burden or the responsibility, bless you, is on the part now of the institution represented by the healthcare professional. So free and informed consent requires that the person or the person surrogate receive all reasonable information, right? So the responsibility of the institution through the healthcare practitioner to provide all reasonable information about essential nature of the proposed treatment, its benefits, risk, side effects, consequences, cost, any reasonable and morally legitimate alternatives, including no treatment, right? So the patient always has the right to refuse treatment. Unless we get into ordinary care, which that's why the word treatment can be a little ambiguous, because the word treatment could be interpreted either as cure or as care. For example, establishing a line, an IV line. The institution may consider that treatment, right? But bioethically, it's providing hydration, and so it's care. Nutrition and hydration, in principle, are standard care. So this is where a right to refuse no treatment at all could mean no IV, no hydration. Under what conditions? Then we have to go back to patient by patient. What are their circumstances? What are the conditions of this particular patient in front of me here now? You know, are they dying imminently? An IV is going to be futile, may be rejected. Or are they young and healthy and they just need to get over the pneumonia, but they happen to be dehydrated? Okay. So we always have to go patient by patient at the end of life, all right? That doesn't mean that it is situation ethics or totally circumstantial or subjective, or that there are no, because we use basic principles to guide us. And those principles do apply universally. Okay, moving forward then, and if you have any comments or questions at any time, do stop me, please. All right, otherwise I'll continue. 26. The free and informed consent of the person or the person's surrogate is required for medical treatments and procedures. So this is standard protocol, which also has its legal dimension to it, right? This is the institution covering itself. The patient has the right, the patient must provide a consent, except in emergency. Emergency situation when consent cannot be obtained and there is no indication that the patient would refuse consent to the treatment. In other words, there's no DNR. Okay, there's no do not resuscitate order, any documents explicitly that the patient has signed or the surrogate. There's no indication to the contrary. So emergency rooms are exempted from a written consent, precisely because of the nature of what goes on there. A person is coming in typically unconscious, like the trauma center at Jackson, flown in by helicopter. These doctors and nurses now trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, and they're not going to be looking for a form of consent because maybe the motorcycle rider never looked into this. They never took this course. Okay, and they never bothered to make a consent or even talk to a proxy about it. So that's the case. And of course, this is based on the first principle of medicine, to heal, right? Do no harm. The flip side of do no harm is Well, no, I'm thinking the counter on the positive side, or the not. Yeah, you're right. Counter is not a good word. The complement, or the positive, do no harm. To state that in the positive way is do the good, right? Benevolence, beneficence, do the good. We can do the good, therefore we must do the good. We're healers, so we try to heal this person. That's what occurs in the emergency room. If everything goes well, then they'll move into a recovery section of the hospital, out of ICU, out of the emergency room. So it is assumed that the person wants to be healed when they come to emergency. This is so obvious stuff, but we have to state it because we are in a world today that we have to state the obvious, okay? Things like do not jaywalk because a car can kill you. A car, if one is jaywalking, a car doesn't have to stop by law. The car does not have to stop by law if one is not crossing in the zebra in the crosswalk. No. Because by stopping, a car can cause an accident to the other cars around it. And so you see how risky jaywalking can be, and we see jaywalking happening all the time, right? All right, so it's an intersection, if you will, a little bit with law, but here we assume that the patient wants to be healed, so no consent is required. That's the exception, if you will, for consent. You noted that these three, 26, 27, and 28, they actually belong to part 3, meaning doctor-patient relationship, before part 5, which is end of life. All right, so this applies to even not end of life, appendicitis. I mean, it applies to any other situation, broken bones, etc., not necessarily end of life. Now, when we get into the 50s, the 50s numbers, that's end of life, more strictly, but it's kind of repeating the same. So 59, and then one couple more will be specifically end of life. So it's a little bit of repetition here. The free and informed judgment made by a competent adult patient concerning the use of withdrawal of life-sustaining procedures should always be respected and normally complied with unless it is contrary to Catholic moral teaching. Again, you can see the institutional underpinning here, that the Catholic hospital, the Catholic rehab center, the Catholic nursing home is trying to protect itself ethically, morally, canonically, from violating Catholic teaching. And so it's part of the policy, institutional policy. In principle, the judgment of the patient should be followed unless it goes against Catholic teaching. Again, when we apply this to end of life, here is the rub with physician-assisted suicide. And as you saw very graphically from last week, the whole issue on the American Nurse Association trying to move into accepting physician-assisted suicide, that the nurse assists the patient in the suicide. This obviously would be forbidden in a Catholic hospital. And it's the judgment of the patient. I want to kill myself because I have this intractable terminal disease. Right? So that's one that cannot be respected. That's one decision that cannot be respected. But it's legal. So what applies here? If the patient insists and insists, transfer of care. It's called transfer of care. Basically, the patient needs to go out the door. And then we get into another issue of complicity. Are we being complicit in transferring that patient from a Catholic hospital to a non-Catholic institution where we know that that patient is going to be euthanized? And limit of cooperation. It's only material cooperation. By the way, I'm going to anticipate a little bit when there is transfer of care based on conscience, on institutional conscience. You follow me? It may be cooperation, but it's only material cooperation in the actual transfer process physically. but it's not formal cooperation because the institution, we don't agree, we Catholic Hospital don't agree with what's going to happen at the non-Catholic hospital, at Jackson Hospital, where the person is going to be given the lethal dosage. And we never know in the end if the patient actually takes a lethal dosage or not at the very end. And if the patient does, that's already outside of the Catholic institution. So therefore, it's not formal cooperation. The will is not engaged. We don't want that patient to kill herself, right? And we're not involved in the killing itself. We're strictly doing the transfer because the patient has a right to transfer. And the patient is requesting transfer, and we're obliging on the transfer. It may lead to the patient's suicide or not, but at that point is beyond the actual physical facility. So think about it functionally, and therefore it may be material cooperation in the fact that we materially transferred, we Catholic Hospital transferred that patient, but then it's already out of our hands. So it's not formal cooperation.
Would be also the same, like let's say a OBGYN who has a pregnant woman who wants to terminate.
Yes.
Then he says, I'm sorry, but I cannot do that.
Cannot do it.
You have to look for another physician.
Exactly. There, it gets a little more tricky in the referral. We should not do the referral.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly. And if they can walk out the door, they walk out the door. If they have to be transferred, well, they would be transferred, but not to the abortion clinic directly. They have to be transferred somewhere else where they can get a Uber or one block before where they can walk there or something like that. Okay, so it gets very tricky, but it comes down to the nitty-gritty of not engaging formally. Materially, yes. For grave reason, we may, it's the principle of double effect. We may engage materially for grave reason, but not formally, okay? Because formally, that's intrinsic evil. And so it does get a little tricky. It could be something similar also with sterilization. The person comes for a therapeutics, for non-therapeutic, or an elective sterilization. No can do, has to be transferred. Okay. All right. Now, these two are for proxy consent. Even though the others also spoke already about surrogates, so these words are interchangeable. 3 words, proxy, surrogate, or agent. You see agent more in legal documents, like we'll see with the power of attorney, agent. But in more the medical, clinical setting and bioethics, you see the proxy or surrogates, all right? They're interchangeable. They represent the patient. They represent the patient. Obviously, when the patient is unable to consent, typically they're unconscious, or maybe they cannot speak, or maybe they're senile, dementia, they're conscious, but demented. So they need a proxy. All right, number 25. Each person may identify in advance a representative, that's another word, representative, proxy, surrogate. Representative to make healthcare decisions as his or her surrogate in the event that the person loses the capacity to make healthcare decisions. So you notice it's not necessarily unconscious. It can be dementia, right? It could be also sometimes, I guess, advanced Parkinson's could also limit the person in speech. Decisions by the designated surrogate should be faithful to Catholic moral principles and to the person's intentions and values. Or if the person's intentions are unknown, to the person's best interest, because maybe it's kind of an emergency situation. The person gave consent years ago to a proxy, to a surrogate, but not specifically to the issue of, for example, vegetative state. So we always focus on the best, what is best for the patient, not what is best for the caretaker, all right? So the idea is not to put them out of our misery. Okay, in the event that an advance directive is not executed, those who are in a position to know best the patient's wishes, usually family members and loved ones, should participate in the treatment decisions for the person who has lost the capacity to make healthcare decisions. So these are very clear, explicit. And so the first part of the statement is we encourage everyone to have some kind of a written document, which we call the advance directive, or more specific, the living will, is basically assigning a surrogate, assigning a proxy, all right? And I'll show you an example in a few minutes. If there is no document, then we look for the next of kin, which typically in a marriage situation is the spouse, unless there has been a divorce. But if there's no divorce, then it's a spouse. And that was the tricky part with regards to Terry Shivo. We'll look at her case under nutrition and hydration. I think it's coming up next lecture. So this proxy, this surrogate, very important. And it's important also for the proxy or the surrogate to know that they don't have to know a lot of the details about Catholic teaching, but they need to know the resources, who they can tap. The doctor in the parish, the priest in the parish or the deacon, they should know what Catholic teaching is. Documents like the ERDS, documents like the Catechism of the Church, at the chancery level in the central, centralized at the diocese level, the phone number, who to call, and then someone in the diocese should refer them again to the ERDs online. There's some at the national level, the Bioethics Center, the NCBC, and so on and so forth. But the proxy has to kind of get with it and find out what is the church is teaching at the crucial moment when it's needed for this particular condition, this particular diagnosis. All right? So the proxy has to be someone who is alert. Finally, number 24, in compliance with federal law, so you can see already that this is the institution, this is the institutional part, Catholic healthcare institution will make available to patients information about their rights under the laws of their state to make an advance directive for their medical treatment. The institution, however, will not honor an advance directive that is contrary to Catholic teaching. If the advance directive conflicts with Catholic teaching, an explanation should be provided as to why the directive cannot be honored. So again, without mentioning it specifically, you can see that this one applies very much to euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. But it's also a moment of evangelization to explain to the patient why you should not kill yourself, okay? There are alternatives, there are good, healthy alternatives, including that whole redemptive value of suffering that we covered last time, okay? All right. So these are the 6 directives, 4 with regards to proxy consent, and 4 with regards to consent itself, free and informed, and these last 2 more specifically the proxy, the surrogate, the representative of the patient. And this you can see also applies to HIPAA and all the federal and state and county regulations that impinge upon healthcare, right? So the institution will follow, of course, the guidance of the law in providing the information. Okay, so you see then that in these 6 paragraphs, these 6 ERDs, directives, it's the nutshell of the whole issue of consent, free and informed, and how to assign a proxy, a surrogate. And they're there online in Spanish and in English. So beyond ourselves, we should also already be thinking about, if we have not done a living will, who we're going to assign. God forbid, it can happen anytime. Just like it happened to Terry, that she collapsed overnight. Just like that, she was in her 20s or 30s when it happened. All right. Beyond ourselves, we should also try to promote this respectfully to our loved ones. To our family and friends, because it saves anguish and distress at the critical moment. All right.
Just, Father,
Yep.
a lot of people, they don't want to speak about that.
Yeah, exactly.
And
We
it's
know.
difficult.
Very difficult, very touchy. We know that objectively that is called denial. But subjectively, we have to deal with each one. And at that point, you know, give them a nice dinner and a glass of wine, and then try to get into the conversation, because especially the very close loved ones, right? Those decisions should be made at least verbally. Well, you know, honey, if you did go into cardiac arrest or PVS or something like that, would you like to live in a vegetative state indefinitely? Most people say, I would never like to live that way, normally, okay? But at least have the conversation, and by word of mouth also counts precisely. And that was, keep talking about Terry's case, but that was, the husband, Michael, prevailed through innumerable court issues, legal, highly legal, because that's what she told me, and that's what she told me, and that's what she told me years ago in a conversation sporadically, came up at a dinner somewhere in a restaurant. She said, oh, I wouldn't want to live that way. Just like that. I wouldn't want to live that way. Those 7 words. It was years of anguish. She went to the Vatican. It was a horrible mess because of the conflict. But at the end of the word, those 7 words prevailed through all the courts. So at least verbally, and it's binding. All right, so let's look a little bit at the legal aspect of this. Again, just scratching the surface because it's not my background or competency, but one of the 3 standard documents of advanced directives, in the plural, advanced directives, living will, power of attorney, a specific type of power of attorney, durable, and then the DNR order, okay? So we're transitioning now into the power of attorney, POA. From the legal perspective, these 3 points apply that I know of. There's a process by which people with the legal right to consent to medical treatment for themselves or for a minor or a ward, they delegate that right to another person. Okay, so this is about proxy. In other words, delegating consent. From the legal perspective, 3 constraints or 3 requirements. The person making the delegation or the person delegating must have the right to consent. Most people in society have that. There may be some cases in certain prisoners, I don't know, but just kind of thinking out loud, situations where the person does not have the right to consent. Or to delegate consent. Off the cuff, I cannot think of an example, but you know, this is very legalistic wording where they give things that are...
Maybe the age? Age.
Oh, all right, so yeah, okay, so it states, yeah, I think it's stated somewhere, right. A minor, exactly. A minor does not have the legal right to consent. All right. And that is up to 17 years old, 11 months, and 29 days of age. And the day after, they do have that legal right. Mentally, they're about the same the day before and the day after, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so also the person must be legally and medically competent. So here, the other extreme. So if number 1 applies to minors, number 2 can apply toward old people if they're already demented, with all due respect, if senility has kicked in, and or Alzheimer, then that's a problem. Okay, so that's a fuzzy area, but if the person can still sign somehow, well, maybe you can get it through. But the person must be medically competent. And finally, the right to consent must be delegated to a legally and medically competent adult, right? So we cannot choose as a surrogate a minor. All right, this sets the background for the power of attorney, which I've been talking about. Okay, so before I go there now, advanced directives, you notice it's in the plural because it typically involves 3 documents: the living will, the power of attorney, and the do not resuscitate order, DNR. So the written instructions, it regards medical care, and they come into place, they kick in when the person is unable to make their own health decisions. Again, this is stating kind of the obvious. It is a guide for not only for the medical profession, but also for the family. Because at that point, we never know that the family may not all be on the same page with regards to treatment. Typically siblings, and then it can get antagonistic between the spouses and the siblings and so forth. So these documents can clarify a lot. It doesn't mean that everybody is still going to be in agreement, but at least it sets the tone for what the preference was for the patient himself, herself. So the next one flows out of that. It may help reduce confusion, disagreement, and they are generally legally binding. But there's still a fuzzy area there, especially if the documents are seeking for something that is either illegal or unethical. For example, here, it could be that the living will, which is asking for euthanasia, or asking for suicide or PAS, may be legal in Hawaii, but when they move to North Carolina, it's no longer legal in North Carolina. Okay, so it's legal in one state, but illegal in another state. Then what happens? You gotta fight it out. So finally, it includes these 3 documents, which we're gonna look at briefly now. The living will, the POA, and the DNR. Okay, moving forward, living will. Not all living wills are Catholic living wills. Okay, and again, the typical issue is going to be taking nutrition and hydration as optional, one, and the other one is going to be allowing for suicide, for PAS. Those are not Catholic living wills. So those are the 2 crucial points, more or less. Those are the main points that make a living will Catholic or not. So the Congress is going to be for Catholic that nutrition and hydration in principle are ordinary means of life support. And secondly, that we do not accept either euthanasia or PAS in any of its morphs, right? So the healthy alternative then is what we have here in Florida anyway, is called a Catholic Declaration on Life and Death. Catholic Declaration on Life and Death. And it's simultaneously, it's a living will that has the advance directive and designation of surrogate, proxy designate. I gave you a page on it. Let's go to the source, which is the Florida Catholic Conference or the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops. So you can punch in Florida Conference. Of Catholic Bishops, the website. I went to this website, the undergraduate class. They used to have it front and center. It's called that Catholic Declaration of Life and Death, but now they don't have it front and center, maybe because the legislative session is on now. A little bit about the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops. Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops. This is an office, department that is in Tallahassee, the state capital. And it is essentially a lobby group that represents the 7 dioceses of the Catholic Church in Florida. Okay, so you see the 7 dioceses here represented. We are Miami down here, the Archdiocese. Call it the first among equals. It's an archdiocese because we have the largest population density of Catholics in the state, but not by territory because there are other territories. Tampa, St. Pete is larger. Venice, Marco Island. Anyway, this office is in Tallahassee. This is Pensacola, Tallahassee, the Panhandle, the seat of state government. And they advocate for Catholic issues. And it's 3 main branches. There are issues on pro-life issues, which typically involve beginning of life and end of life. Then there is healthcare, separate. And then there is education. Those are the 3 main branches of the Florida Catholic Conference. And so they have a website. It's very informative, has a lot of resources. And under resources, we have to hunt here. Culture of other resources, culture of life, I believe. So we had to hunt for a little bit. Looking for the Catholic Declaration of Life and Death. So frankly, I don't know why it has been buried. Into their website. It used to be more accessible. Here, the Catholic Declaration of Life and Death. So at the end of the day, what I do is I end up searching it under search because I can't really find yet how to get to it directly. There. Oh my God. Here. Finally. All right. So somehow you get to this page. And here it is in English. And it's essentially the same thing that I gave you without the blue strip on it. We'll go over it in a minute. And there is a Spanish version. So it's been translated into Spanish. Let me go back for a moment, 1 level. And it also has explanation. All right, so for example, here's an explanation that is online, paragraph by paragraph. Okay, pretty expansive. And also this one that is 8.5 by 11 format. It just means that this can also be printed out. It's 4 pages long, but if you're having maybe a discussion group or something like that at some point, maybe with some other physicians that are not aware of this document or some other kind of setting, maybe in catechesis. Anyway, these documents may be informative and helpful for starting a discussion. We can go back here now, and I'll send you these. I'll post together when I send out the link this afternoon. I'll send you these documents also virtually. So if you want to print them out and get other people involved in it, all right, you'll have the access. All right, so let's go through it for a moment. It's a Catholic Declaration on Life and Death and Advanced Directive together, 2 in 1, in the sense that the first half of the document is assigning a surrogate and an alternate surrogate, so 2 really, first one and second one, in case the first one is not available, when we have the emergency or when we have the need. The first one when be traveling in the South Pacific Islands and cannot be get a hold of, but the second one is here locally, and so it will go to the second one, all right? You notice that it starts with a statement of faith, basically. I am executing this Catholic Declaration of Life and Death while I am of sound mind, and it's intended to designate a surrogate and provide guidance in making medical decisions in the event that I am incapacitated or unable to express my own wishes. Sorry. First is the statement of what the document is, all right? Spell it out. Then is a statement of faith. So this is where it gets Catholic or at least Christian, because this can apply to Protestants also. I believe that I have been created for eternal life in union with God. The truth that my life is a precious gift from God has profound implications for the questions of stewardship over my life. I have a duty to preserve my life and to use it for God's glory. But the duty to preserve my life is not absolute, for I may reject life-prolonging procedures that are insufficiently beneficial or excessively burdensome. Here's the benefit burden analysis, and also the language that human life is a fundamental value, but it's not an absolute value. Did we talk about that? The distinction between fundamental and absolute, I'm not sure, I'm not clear. Maybe I haven't yet. Yeah. All right, I think I used that as a preamble to nutrition and hydration, yeah, right, so it'll come up. But the distinction is, the distinction between fundamental and absolute is fundamental. This is what I mean. Human life is a fundamental value, meaning that we should always try to preserve it, but within reason. In other words, at some point, no matter how hard we try to preserve human life, at some point, human life is going to end here on earth. Death will overtake sooner or later. You know, death always wins in the end. And we hope that it's a far end, but it can come sooner, later, we never really know. So that's why it's not an absolute value. Because if human life were an absolute value, then we would have to preserve it no matter what, come hell or high water, which we cannot do, it's unsustainable. So it's a little philosophical, but it's a critical distinction between absolute and fundamental. It's a fundamental value, it's kind of at the ground level. We always give the benefit of preserving life whenever we can, but reasonably. It comes a point where the person is going to die no matter what we do. So it actually is inhumane to try to keep a person alive beyond their time, because now what we're doing is we're prolonging their death, which is an injustice. And that's why it's not absolute in the philosophical way that if it were absolute, we would have to preserve it no matter what. And it's unsustainable. It's not logical, it's not possible. All right? So it's a fundamental value. That means that we may never kill anyone directly, but it's not an absolute value, meaning that we may allow people to die. Another way of framing the question. It's a little tricky, it's philosophical, but it's a crucial distinction between fundamental and absolute. Most people, I can tell you out there, struggle with that difference. And when those two things become blurry, you get the two extremes. The one extreme is, let's put them out of our misery, that's no quality of life. Let's take him off of everything, every life support, even if the person could have recovered or they're not imminently dying. That's one extreme on the liberal utilitarian side. And the other extreme is the person is dying imminently, but let's continue the life support, let's continue the vent and the peg, right? That's the other extreme. And so making this distinction allows us to not go to either extreme, but to stay really focused on the patient individually here and now, what is happening organically, and therefore also mentally and spiritually. All right. So you see that first sentence, that second sentence packed in there. Suicide and euthanasia are never morally acceptable options. Okay? And therefore, the counterpart is no euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide. If I should become irreversibly and terminally ill, I request to be fully informed of my condition so that I can prepare myself spiritually for death and witness to my belief in Christ's redemption. This also has consequences because now this shifts the emphasis to the spiritual aspect of preparing for death, which is a very good thing, right? This practically, functionally means if I'm Catholic, get me a priest, get me a deacon, get me someone, pastoral care team to come in, including whatever sacraments I can receive. So I can receive the Eucharist, Viaticum, if not, confession, anointing of the sick. If I'm unconscious, anointing of the sick, that puts me in a state of grace, which is a great thing. So that has implications. If I'm not Catholic, whatever religion, whatever faith, the minister, the imam, the rabbi, whatever the person requests. Okay, so then we go into the designation of the surrogate. In the event that I become incapacitated, I'm sorry. Well, you have the document also. In the case that I become incapacitated, I designate as my surrogate for healthcare decisions, not for the finances, my bank account, or the car, or the house, or anything else, healthcare decisions. If no one is assigned, then write none or put a line across it. The current name and address of the person and their phone number, as many phone numbers as we can put there. Typically the cell number is now what is the most common one, right? Cell phone number. And then a second one, just in case when it happens 50 years from now, if this first person is not available, unable, or unwilling to perform, they may have become senile also by the time we become senile, okay, if they're contemporaries. So it's a prudent thing to put someone who is typically younger for the second surrogate, right? But also someone who is a wise person or has potential for becoming wise as the years progress. If my surrogate is unwilling or unable to perform his or her duties or cannot be contacted, I wish to designate as my alternate surrogate. And again, one doesn't have to designate an alternate, but there's space for second. So it's a, what do you call that? Redundancy, right? The same. Okay, this directive will permit, sorry, I should have done this earlier. This directive will permit my surrogate to make healthcare decisions and to provide, withhold, or withdraw consent on my behalf. So we're delegating a lot, right? To apply for public benefits, to defray, so you see it's got, apply for Medicare, Medicaid, has legal and financial implications, to defray the cost of healthcare, to receive my personal healthcare information, HIPAA, and to authorize my admission to or transfer from a healthcare facility. So also legal, see? My surrogate is further appointed as my personal representative. I think this has legal implications. Number 2, yeah. So this has to do with HIPAA, there you go. So this is the word that they use. Another one, personal representative, instead of surrogate, instead of proxy, instead of agent, for HIPAA purposes. At the federal level, personal representative, okay. This directive is not being made as a condition of treatment or admission to a healthcare facility. Again, especially emergency room, right? I don't need to have this document to get treatment. I can also speak on my own behalf. Or someone can speak on my behalf, assuming what is best for me, a next of kin. This document must be signed and witnessed on the other side to be valid. So here we go, the other side. This is the living will part. So you see how it's an assignment of surrogate, and at the same time, the living will part is here. So this is where it's going to get a little more doctrinal. The following gives guidance for carrying out my wishes at the end of life. If at any time I am incapacitated and I have a terminal condition or have an end-stage condition, terminology, and if my attending or treating physician and another consulting physician, so two opinions, have determined that there is no reasonable medical probability of my recovery from such condition. This speaks to the prognosis, bottom line, a poor prognosis, failing prognosis, all right? My healthcare surrogate, designated above if any, will be authorized to make decisions for me in accordance with my wishes expressed in this declaration. If my surrogate cannot be contacted, or I have not named the surrogate, then I request and direct that each of the following will be considered in making a decision for me. So you see this leaves room open for the document standalone, even without an actual proxy, all right? So here we go. That I be provided care and comfort and my pain be relieved. Okay, so standard care, remember? Nutrition, hydration, comfort, and not in a human contact. No inappropriate, excessively burdensome, or disproportionate means be used to prolong my life. This can include medical or surgical procedures. So, trying to get to the extraordinary means of life support. There should be a presumption in favor of providing nutrition and hydration to me, including medically assisted nutrition and hydration. This medically assisted, again, we haven't looked at it. I had to reverse the order of these things because of the NAA issue, but I'll cover this. Nutrition and hydration. The fact that they are provided artificially does not make them extraordinary necessarily. What do I mean by artificial? Well, again, a PEG, tube to the stomach, or an NG tube, a tube through the nose into the stomach, or an IV. Those are artificial means of nutrition or hydration, but they're not necessarily extraordinary. They're artificial because it's not natural, it's just swallowing, right? But when the swallowing is compromised, then we look at enteral or parenteral modes of nutrition or hydration. They're artificial, but that doesn't make them by themselves, in and of itself, extraordinary. Not necessarily. We'll have to think about that a little bit, but again, we'll cover it in more detail next class. I'm just saying here that it provides for that. That in principle, nutrition and hydration are ordinary, even if they have to be provided artificially, unless they cannot reasonably be expected to prolong my life, so feudal care, right? Or the measure used to deliver the nutrition and hydration are excessively burdensome and do not offer sufficient benefit or will cause me significant physical discomfort. Or I am imminently dying from an irreversible condition. So you can see this should be actually and or, because it could be that all these actually apply to the particular patient in their dying moment, or it could be that only one of these. So the second one in particular is a little more subjective. So you notice, excessively burdensome to me, we saw that that's a very subjective thing, you know, but it has to be respected. I always bring up the case of dialysis. Dialysis on the medical side is standard care, but for a patient, that patient may have had enough. Renal failure, total renal failure, it's their end stage, but dialysis keeps them going. However, the patient may say, I've had it, this is an excessive burden, and therefore refuse that which medically is considered standard care. Okay. Nothing should be done with the intention of causing my death. See, this engages the intention of the agent providing, whether the individual or the institution. Again, to put them out of our misery, right? To put the patient out of our misery, that is an intention to cause death. That has crossed the line between allowing to die or killing. And again, it's subtle but real, and we have to be very alert to it. Spiritual care to be provided, including the sacraments whenever possible, and for Catholics or Christians. Even in an emergency or in end stage, a Protestant may seek either the anointing of the sick and or confession, right? If they request it spontaneously, because really the only thing that is needed to receive the further sacraments is the first sacrament, which is baptism. And we recognize Protestant baptism as long as it's done canonically, meaning using water, not soda or orange juice, water, and the Trinitarian formula. I baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And that is what we call the canonical formula. That could have been done at any stage of life, as long as the person had never been baptized before, and the person consents freely to the baptism, or if it's a minor, the proxy, or whoever is the surrogate of that child. And the minister doesn't have to be an official minister, a Protestant minister. It could be a layperson that is doing the baptism. Sometimes in emergency, it happens that nurses do it, but they should have consent for doing it. They should not be baptizing patients surreptitiously, all right? Sometimes it happens with some nurses that are very Catholic in a secular hospital, in the NICU unit, in neonatal ICU. This nurse is going around baptizing all these babies just in case. A little risky, okay, because it's someone needs to consent for that baptism. All right, so you can see that this includes the spiritual dimension. We really want to integrate it to this end-of-life situation. Any additional instruction that needs to meet Catholic standards, right? So give me the death pill is not going to fly here. It could be some other things. Please contact this person that is very dear to me, or anything really that is that the patient wants at the end of their life.
So if you're in doubt, contact Father Trophy.
Thank you very much. And I'll pass you on to the website. Hopefully I'm not senile yet. But yeah, that's the idea. That we will become resources, all right? And part of this idea is to pass some of my burden to you so that you can become resources. Yeah, it's a teamwork, right? Okay. Finally, I don't know. I could at some point here put a Bible on my chest when I'm dying, just as a symbol, and open it to this particular passage that is very significant to me. Anything can go here as long as it's reasonable, right? Signatures required, yes. So 2 witnesses, but the 2 witnesses, notice, there are simple restrictions. It's my intention that my surrogate, family, and physicians honor this declaration as the expression of my treatment wishes. I understand the full import of this declaration. I am emotionally and mentally competent to make this declaration. Okay, hopefully that's true and real. So then it's binding. So the name of the person, the signature of the person, the patient, that particular date where he or she signs, the last 4 of the social, to give it some legal bite, if you will. And then 2 witnesses, their printed name and their signature. And the only thing is that the healthcare surrogate should not serve as a witness. Okay, so you notice that it actually involves 4 people, this document, potentially 4 or up to 5 people. It would be in order, the patient or the potential patient, each one of us, for example, and then 1 or 2 surrogates that we are assigning, and then 2 witnesses, which can be any 2 people who are willing to just, the witness is to witness to the signature, actually. The witness is witnessing that I, the patient, am the one who is signing the document.
It doesn't need to be notarized.
Does not to be notarized. No, does not need to be notarized. It has more bite if you do notarize it, and if you file it in the court, has more bite, if you will, more legal standing, but clinically does not have to be notarized. So notice that this one is focusing on treatment, and therefore we're concerned primarily with treatment, with clinical options. All right. At least one of the witnesses must not be a spouse or blood relative of the person signing. So these are the recommendations. So you see, it does involve several people, but what the witnesses are witnessing to is the signature, that the signature here in this line belongs to this person up here. All right? Okay. Sorry to go into such detail, but believe me that this document,
This is great fun.
right? It is a good resource to have.
I have mine.
There you go. There you go.
It's not happening.
Right, so check it out and see, because if it's not Catholic, it may be utilitarian, and it may not include the provision of nutrition and hydration as standard care. That's one, okay? So that's the typical one that today on a secular side can be, they consider it optional across the board. So it's kind of, the default is maybe to not provide nutrition and hydration. And what we're saying is the default is to provide nutrition and hydration unless these special conditions apply. All right. Back to our presentation then. We're going to transition. This is just a link for the Florida Catholic Conference. Okay, now the POA is the second document in the package. And in general, a power of attorney is legally binding, should be notarized and filed in the court. And then, oh, so another thing, who to give these documents to? We want to, once we fill them out, we want to make copies, and we don't want to put them under the bushel basket. We don't want to put them under the pillow or the mattress. We want to disseminate these documents, you know, to our loved ones, our spouses, if we're married, to our adult children, if we have them, other, you know, madrinas and padrinos, the close people to us, close people. Also, our attending physician, if we have a primary, should have this. If we also have like a family lawyer, to that person also, okay? But we want to have it so that people have access to it. The same with the power of attorney. Only that this one is focusing on this power of attorney is focusing on the medical aspect. So it's the medical aspect of the POA, because the POA also gives powers to the agent for financial things and for other material goods, including the deed on a house, inheritance, you name it. But you know, when the attorney is involved, it's going to be a fiscal matter one way or another. So it's the medical aspect of the POA that we're concerned with. And this particular POA should be durable. It's a specific type of POA. It's not just a power of attorney. Durable means that it actually kicks in when the person becomes incompetent. All right, when the principal, meaning the person who is executing the POA, becomes incompetent or incapacitated somehow. And Whereas the POA, the normal standard POA, ceases when the person is mentally incapacitated, all right? So that's why it's important that it's durable. Okay. That goes into the DNR, but before going into the DNR, I want to show you an example of a document for the state. So you notice that this one now is at the level of the state. So I think I gave you, oh no, I'm sorry, what I gave you is a copy of the DNR. Yeah, this one is longer, so I did not give you a copy of it, but I will send it virtually. If you wish, you can copy it. I think it's about 3 or 4 pages, and that's why I did to copy it. But I'm going to show it to you in a minute, as soon as I can find it here. Here. And this is for the state of Florida. So whereas the living will is more from the Catholic side, for sure, this one is also from Tallahassee, but different office. This is the state office. And here it is. I can go through it briefly. See how it's durable? It has to have that word specifically, okay? So it's a particular type. And lawyers and the legal system knows what that means. That specifically kicks in when the person becomes unconscious or mentally incompetent. Again, all the biographic stuff at the beginning, name, and the person we are signing, the agent. In this case, it's called the agent, which is the same as surrogate or representative or proxy. You put the county, either Dade, Broward, wherever we are. Okay, so manage and conduct my affairs. That's a very big statement. It moves down and it has all these parts which are mostly fiscal, has to involve with goods and services, payments, deposit boxes, the bank, of course, big. So this is basically handing over one's life, right? Physically, materially. Powers, taxes, trusts, interests, business interests, personal interests, and finally, last and not least, number 10, healthcare powers. And here is the one that concerns us from the bioethical perspective, right? We're focusing on health and healthcare. So this is where it assigns the representative to decide on our behalf, essentially. But this one gives also the power to refuse life-prolonging procedures and so forth. So if I am in a state that recognizes physician-assisted suicide, then my representative can decide on my behalf. And that's where we part ways. And that's why the POA in Florida is okay because it's still not legal. But we never know when it's going to become legal because compassionate choices are very active in Florida. And they'll continue to push it every year in the ballot and so forth until they get it. Therefore, to counterpart this document, we need the other one. We need the living will, the Catholic living will, all right? Okay, it's just that this one has more legal binding in case there is an issue that the living will does not want to be honored. Let's say we don't go to Mercy, we go to Jackson, they may get more technical on that. They may not accept our Catholic declaration of life and death. Again, this one requires 2 witnesses. And it does have to be notarized down here. And then registered with the court. But you can see that this is at the state level. So that's with regards to the durable POA. Finally, we go to DNR. which is the do not resuscitate order. Remember when we looked at vital organs and we looked at the distinction between assisting or substituting vital organs? And then we look at, it depends for some organs. It depends on the setting. For other organs, so in other words, there's not necessarily 100% overlap or compatibility between the clinical determination of assisting or substituting and the bioethical determination. Again, the example I always use is with regards to renal failure. Standard care will be dialysis, but bioethically may be considered extraordinary. So a right to refusal. Here we're focusing mostly on the heart. So cardiopulmonary resuscitation in the case of cardiac arrest, otherwise known as a heart attack, all right? So to resuscitate or not. And I think at that time I talked about, well, it depends. Is a person basically young? What's the prognosis? You know, hope for recovery. Or is a person old and their comorbidities? They already have some other issues going on, but especially with the elderly, the typical issue is breaking ribs and risking punctured lungs from that broken rib and so forth. So that obviously will complicate seriously and compromise further the health of this elderly person who has gone into cardiac arrest. And the heart being a vital organ in cardiac arrest has failed naturally, we may allow that patient, we may allow that patient to die, right? And that would be the DNR. So this kind of dialogue is difficult to have when people are young and healthy and full of life, but the clock moves forward irreversibly, inexorably. And so it's important to have these conversations while we can talk about them rationally. So it's a request to not have cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, if the heart stops or if we stop breathing. Advanced directives do not have to include a DNR. That's another thing, that each one of these three documents is really a standalone. They don't have to, the ideal is to have the package, but not necessarily. Each one of them is a standalone. If you ask me, the most critical of the three is the first one is the living will, really, because that is longer impact. That really frames it within a Catholic setting. And the least important, in my opinion, is the POA. And the DNR, the proxy can do that for us. So we can delegate the DNR to the proxy, which I have already covered that base by doing the living will ahead of time. Once this DNR order goes into the chart of the patient, that document is very binding, all right? And all the healthcare professionals are, in fact, I understand that it goes on top of the chart, right? And all the professionals that are looking at that chart, they're bound by it. So the nurse on the code blue, here's the DNR. Okay, the rest is post and most. So this is a good spot to take a break.
Father, I have a question.
Yes, please.
I was wondering if by chance, do you know about which countries have this sort of designation of, you know, or advanced directives? Because I don't think it's something that's done in Latin America.
Yes, again, the short answer is I don't really know, but we should explore that. And yeah, and most likely it goes on the legal side of things, right? Because this death has been happening irreversibly. But on the medical side, I don't really know. I don't know. You know, we tend to be so organized, relatively speaking, in the US. So, for example, these ERDs, right? It's at you can see it's at the level of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. Exactly. So this DRDs, and if you read part 1, the very introduction, they're binding for all Catholic healthcare facilities in the United States. Okay, hospitals, rehab centers, nursing homes, other clinics, as well. If they have the Catholic identity, the ERDs are binding. So that gives a certain uniformity across interstate. It's a great thing. The same on the legal side with the power of attorneys. In our countries, we know how it is, right? It's touch and go. It depends. A lot of it is part of the oral tradition, but it hasn't been formalized this way necessarily. And so that's why it's a great help, particularly since they have been translated into Spanish now. So this is a great contribution to take down into our Latin American countries and try to put it through. You know, at least we can start at the diocesan level and move it that way, and maybe bump it up to the Episcopal Conference of Regions. Interested if Salam would pick something up like this, you know, and try to, it may have to be enculturated a little bit, the language and whatnot, but the core principles are Catholic, which in fact, the ERDs have gone to the Vatican for approval. When we did that revision of part 6, which was the latest edition. Remember the previous one, the 5th edition is from 2009. So to 2018, we're talking almost 10 years gap. So it was part 6 that was revamped and expanded because of continued collaboration with non-Catholic facilities, okay, and the limits of cooperation. So those drafts went to the Vatican for revision and then came back with the approval, and then that's when they were promulgated. So what I'm trying to say by this is that the ERDs are Catholic to the core at the universal level. And so in principle, they are applicable anywhere in the world. What they need to do is be translated into that language.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that, the beginning of life issues, the pro-abortions have been moving fast in all the countries.
Very big time.
But we're not moving forward in, either increasing the knowledge on what is true the beginning of life,
yes,
and also the end of life.
Yes, exactly. So my intuition, I don't know for sure, but my intuition is that the pro-abortion or pro-choice mentality has moved longer and faster, wider in Latin America than the euthanasia movement. I think culturally we're still more reticent about killing the elderly, killing the disabled, and so forth, simply because we can see them, and there's still some extended families in Latin America where we have 3 generations at home. The grandparents are still kind of respected, even though a lot of that is also being lost, we know. But it's just my intuition that end-of-life killing is not getting as much traction yet. But, this mentality, utilitarian mentality does move forward. Okay, so I think it's a good moment to take a break now. All right, Monica, we're going to pause here for a while, maybe 10, 15 minutes. It's 11:11, so about 11:20 we'll be back approximately, okay? I'm gonna pause recording. Okay, everyone, welcome back. And I forgot to look at the actual DNR form just before the break. So let me pick up there for a moment. And I believe you have a copy of it. Again, this is from the state of Florida, Department of Health. And it's only official if it's in yellow. But if it is in yellow, then it kicks in, all right? And of course, the first thing is name and date. Then these are the statements, excuse me, based upon informed consent. I, the undersigned, hereby direct that CPR be withheld or withdrawn. If it's not signed by the patient, then essentially the surrogate or a court-appointed guardian, proxy, which has more legal, at least in the state of Florida, has a legal definition in that chapter of the statutes, or a durable POA, see where it kicks in, which also has legal status specifically in the Florida statutes. FS is the Florida statutes. So that's at the state level. And he would be the assigned person. Now, statement by the physician, I, the undersigned, so this is going to be signed also by the doctor. A physician license pursuant to chapter such and such of the Florida statutes. I'm the physician of the patient named above. I hereby direct the withholding or withdrawing of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, artificial ventilation, cardiac compression, endotracheal intubation and defibrillation, right? All the various techniques from the patient in the event of the patient's cardiac or respiratory arrest. So you see, these are medical orders, medical orders. Physician signs their emergency telephone number, print the name, date, and the license, the medical license number. So you see, it's an official document of medical orders. It goes on the chart, typically on the top of the package. And then this can be filled out and cut out and folded and kept in the wallet or the purse, something like that. It's essentially the same as above, but in miniature. In case someone has an accident, there is the document. Right. So it has essentially the same information as above, but in miniature, so it can be carried around, either purse, the wallet, or any other personal item. So that's essentially the DNR. So this little paper is very powerful when either the heart stops beating or the lungs stop breathing, just from the simple observation of the patient. No instrument required. Okay, so I'll send you this link also, and I gave you a hard copy of it. Now, let's go into these two final aspects of consent and proxy consent, which are known as POLST and MOLST. These are the acronyms for physician orders for life-sustaining treatments, or medical orders for life-sustaining treatments. And these are orders, these are medical orders, these are physician orders, so they are clinically binding. And I'm going to show you examples. From the state of Florida. Again, it's a one-page front and back, one sheet front and back. I'm going to start on the back first because it has directions here and pretty much explains the document. So these are physician orders, medical orders, orders that apply when healthcare is needed or available and the patient is incapacitated, all right? So with regards to POLST, the physician orders, they must be completed. Is that large enough?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so must be completed by a healthcare professional based on medical indications and a discussion of treatment benefits and burdens and elicitation of patient preferences. So this is a dialogue between the doctor and the patient. Pulse must be signed by a doctor, an MD or a DO, doctor in osteopathy or osteopathic medicine, right? So either a medical doctor or a doctor in osteopathic medicine in order for the order to be valid. Verbal orders are acceptable as long as there is a follow-up signature by the physician in accordance with the facility or the community policy. So as long as it's been talked about first, and then the follow-up is for the doctor to sign the form. Pulse must be signed by the patient or resident. It could be mental. In the case of mental, sometimes they're not called patient, but they're called residents. Or it could be in a prison situation. Or healthcare surrogate or proxy, so they use both terms in order for it to be valid. Now, when does it apply? What is the use? Any section of pulse, and you'll see there are 5 sections, but the main ones are the first 3 sections. Any section of pulse not completed implies full treatment for that section, all right? So there'll be a section on resuscitation and so forth. So if it's not completed, then it means that full treatment applies. Use of original form is strongly encouraged, but photocopies and faxes may do, and they are legally binding. A semi-automatic external defibrillator, the AED, like the one we have across the hallway here, should not be used on a person who has chosen do not attempt resuscitation. So DNR includes an AED, a defibrillator. That's why I included the AED in the, when we looked at DNR, as one of the possible machines. Oral fluids and nutrition must always be offered if medically feasible. So that's assuming ordinary care. When comfort cannot be achieved in the current setting, the person, including someone with comfort measures only, should be transferred to a setting able to provide comfort, such as hospice unit. A person who chooses either comfort measures only or limited additional interventions, which are the options you'll see in a minute, should not be entered into a level 1 trauma system because they're going to go full blown, right? They're going to go full code and do everything possible. So if they have chosen option B or C, meaning comfort only or a limited intervention, don't put that person into a level 1 trauma center or system or place. IV medication to enhance comfort may be appropriate for a person who has chosen comfort measures only. IV medication, translating that mostly into an analgesic, morphine or an analog, right? That's medication. It goes a little more than just fluids. IV fluids typically is hydration. But medication could be basically a painkiller. All right. So a person who desires IV fluids should indicate limited intervention or full treatment, right? So we'll see that then that excludes, if we choose comfort measures only, we will not get an IV. We will exclude an IV. A person with capacity for, or the surrogate proxy, can revoke a pulse at any time and request alternative treatment. Now, this is a crucial part. In principle, it's there. In practice, it's hard to rescind a pulse once it's in place. So whereas in principle it's here, actually in practice, we're noticing that once a pulse is in place, it's very, very hard to rescind, okay? At any rate, there are provisions for reviewing the pulse periodically. So here are the provisions. This pulse should be reviewed periodically and a new pulse completed if necessary when, and he gives 3 conditions or 3 scenarios. The person is transferred from one care setting to another care setting or another level within the same setting. Could be the same hospital, but different level. From maybe from the regular room to ICU, for example, or from one institution to another, or whether there is a substantial change in the person's health status, even within the same setting or room, whatever, or the person's treatment preferences change. So if the patient changed her mind or his mind with regards to a prognosis or a treatment option, then a new post is indicated. And then there is space here for reviewing periodically. Date, who's doing the reviewing, typically the doctor, where, the location actually, and the 3 options, there's no change, still valid, or this particular form is voided, and maybe a new one is done, and then you would check this, or maybe a new one is not done, and then it's just voided, period. Okay, so this is for Florida. Now let's look at what it actually includes. The front part. Again, the biographical information about the patient first. As an identifier. And then here are the 4 options. Okay, first of all, CPR. And 3 options for CPR. Either attempt the CPR or do not attempt the CPR. Sorry, do. If this is left blank, then number 2 kicks in, or B kicks in, medical intervention. So it may not be a heart issue. And then, so it goes into B. So it's time to establish kind of an algorithm, a simple algorithm when a patient is incompetent or unresponsive. Sorry, I should have pointed that out. Unresponsive, no pulse or no breathing. Here, 3 options for medical treatment, either full treatment or limited treatment or just comfort care. So you see it downgrades, okay, to most aggressive to least aggressive intervention or more mild. Full treatment, and it gets a little medical in here, it gets clinical, so that it's a guidance for the healthcare facility. So it's put in medical terms, all right? So in addition to the comfort care and limited care, use intubation, airway opening, mechanical, the full blown. So this would include a vent, and this could include also a PEG. Transfer to ICU if indicated, etc. So full treatment, okay? Or some intermediate treatment, try to define it the best way possible. The goal is to treat medical condition to avoid burdensome measures. See, burdensome measures is subjective, right? Should be a burden to the patient, not to the institution or to the doctor, but to the patient. How to define burden for the patient, especially if the patient is unresponsive. So we have to assume the best, but it's trying to find a middle ground, if you will, or not really a middle ground, but something that is reasonable. In addition to the care described in comfort use, antibiotics, for example, IV, so hydrate, monitor, cardiac monitor, intubate if necessary, so event. All right, so transfer to hospital if necessary. Generally avoid ICU, so it's stepping down a little bit. ICU would be considered extraordinary means generally. In principle, is extraordinary, all right, from the bioethical perspective. So basic medical treatment, again, it's not just care, it's some level of treatment. And obviously, C is going to be just really care, what we understand as care in the bioethical term, which is going to come down essentially to nutrition and hydration. So comfort, meaning also analgesics to try to manage pain. Okay, relief pain and suffering, they put both words. We know that in some settings they're interchangeable, but they're not really, strictly speaking. Through the use of any medication, by any route, positioning, wound care, other measures, this could be bed sores, etc. Oxygen, yes, but only a respirator, not ventilator, okay? Respirator. Okay, suction if there's obstruction on the throat, etc. The focus here is comfort. Transfer of comfort need cannot be obtained in the, oh yeah, this is good. If the patient is not in a hospital and can be maintained comfortably in a non-hospital setting, then that's preferable. But if the patient can get better comfort in an institutional setting, then that should move forward. Hospice or palliative care should be considered here. Again, to maximize comfort is the goal, right? Some additional orders. This could be unrelated to treatment. Please get such and such people, contact this person, etc. Now, nutrition. I would say nutrition, this includes also hydration in the nutrition, because typically it's going to be a hydrated nutrition that the patient is getting. 3 levels, long-term, or for a particular trial period, something is being tried, some protocol is being attempted to see if the person comes back or not, right? Could be the person is in coma. The hope is that they'll wake from it and not slip into PVS. But if it's prolonged, then it may be stopped. Or the third option, of course, is no nutrition. And you know, this is by tube. So this could be, we've talked about the PEG and the NG tube, or not yet? Maybe not, no. Okay, nutrition and hydration coming up next week. See, tube can be interpreted either as a nasal tube, and the nasal is temporary, or the PEG going directly into the stomach, which is long-term. It doesn't specify. So there's a lot of latitude in this option here. Of course, if the second option is chosen, then it needs to be specified here what constitutes this trial period. Okay, makes sense. Finally, option D for hospice or palliative care. If applicable, the patient is currently enrolled in a hospice or palliative care situation. Oh, sorry. One is for hospice, the other one is for palliative care. So these are, I presume these are mutually exclusive. Or if not indicated, it should also be checks just to make sure. This is kind of a redundancy, just to make sure that these options were looked at. Finally, it's the physician's signature and the patient's signature, or if the patient is incompetent, then the surrogate, right? And then the license of the patient, of the doctor. So these are doctor's orders. You see, and they're binding. Once this goes into the chart, it's binding. And like I say, whereas in theory, they can be removed by the patient anytime, in practice, it's very difficult to remove them once they're actually in. And that's why some Catholic bioethicists or other bioethicists also have said no to post for now, because it actually, we never know when we have, when we stop breathing or our heart stops at that specific moment. We really never know when it's going to happen ahead of time. Okay, and so this just essentially relinquishes power. It's too simplistic. We don't know what treatment options are going to be available when that happens. And just to pigeonhole it into these few options, it's trying to state just kind of a gradient here between full treatment and no treatment and something in between. But we really never know what's going to be available to us when it does really happen. It could be years from now, etc. So to do a pulse in general, let's say on the more conservative side, people will abstain from doing a pulse because it relinquishes too much authority from the patient to the physician. The institution, on the other hand, is pushing for pulsed. Why? Because pulsed or MOLS, which I'll show you is even a little more drastic, gives the institution more latitude for treating the patient according to what the institution or the doctor considers that is best for the patient. So this goes back to doctor knows best type of thing. So it's kind of a pushback from the patient rights mentality or the patient rights movement that is spreading, all right? In the extreme case, the patient rights movement is that the patient determines treatment absolutely. I will tell the doctor, only do this, that, and that on me, and do not do anything else, even though the other things could be easily indicated, you know. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is doctor decides and the patient just passively accepts everything that the doctor decides. Those are two extremes. Pulsed is leaning toward, it favors the medical profession, it favors the institution, it gives more latitude for the doctor to act, and the patient to accept what the doctor is providing. So that's really the background intention of pulsed, is for the medical profession to recover more of their medical clinical authority. And that's why it's binding, it's very binding, and it's difficult to remove from the chart once it's placed in it. All right, so that's pulse. Again, it's up for grabs in the sense that the Catholic Church has not made an official declaration on it. A little further from this, unless you have some questions or comments, the rub is, oh, sorry, I forgot to discuss briefly the last section E here, section E, is just documenting the discussion. With whom was this document discussed? With the patient or the parent of a minor or a surrogate or a guardian from the court or someone other, if there's a distinction between a surrogate and a proxy, which we are saying that those terms can be synonymous, right? Or it could be several people. So all of the ones that apply here, all of the ones that apply would be checked just to ensure that this form has been discussed by the doctor with all people's concerned. All right, beyond this one is one that moves even further into the institution, which is most. So this one, the change is on the first word of the acronym. This is not even just physician, these are medical orders, which means that even non-doctors, non-MDs, and you'll have a list here. Again, it's in the back side of the explanation. Let me find it. So this could be a nurse practitioner. This could be an advanced practice RN. It could be a physician assistant, not necessarily a doctor a medical doctor, okay? So this gives the institution even more power when here we go. When the physician is not around, the practitioner, the nurse practitioner can take charge or can implement, or the nurse or a PA. So you see, this now is getting a little further away from the actual doctor who is responsible for the care of that patient.
Yeah.
Determining.
I think part of that has been created because now there is a tendency for everyone to have an extended healthcare provider. So there are so many PAs and nurse practitioners working for physicians that they have empowered them to do this thing.
There you go. Okay, but this is kind of reverses the role.
That they created, which I don't like.
Exactly. You see, and you're speaking as a medical doctor. So what I'm trying to say is that this favors the institution for reasons other than healthcare. Typically, they're going to be fiscal reasons. Because obviously, the salary of a PA is going to be lower than the salary of an MD, right? As things go. But also the training is not as... And that's why this is the background to this, or the push for this, is not necessarily healthcare as such. So it's favoring the institution rather than the patient. At any rate, it's out there. And now that healthcare is getting more and more institutionalized that way, where the doctor and associates are more and more the employees, the direct employees of a healthcare system. Primarily and secondarily, they practice their art. Okay. It's challenging, right? Because the priorities are veering away from care for the patients, what's best for the patient. Anyway, I'm not going to go through the form in detail, but the rest of it is pretty parallel to POST, aside from the biographical information, obviously. Then CPR is right up front, attempt or not attempt CPR. If that one is left blank, then it goes into B, medical intervention. It gives, you see the three options, it just reverses the order of them. They start with comfort as the first one, and full treatment as the third option. It's just the reverse chronologically or just by listing, but it doesn't really represent a priority necessarily. All right. Transfer, then the nutrition and hydration, which again, hydration is implied in the nutrition of this, in this thing is hydrated nutrition. The options there. Here, okay, sorry. For this particular form, I also need to point out, I could not find one for Florida, but this one is a couple of years old, so I need to do a little research and see if Florida has come up with the most in the past year and a half. But this one is from Rhode Island, so this one is state specific, but it's in the Northeast where there's a greater tendency to go toward even physician-assisted suicide. So we have the West Coast of the US and the Northeast, the New England area that is generally pushing for PAS and all those things. So this particular form is from the state of Rhode Island. But it makes a distinction between nutrition and hydration. And then if there is an advanced directive, what kind of documents are available? Living will, proxy, POA, etc. Okay, again, the signature of the most qualified healthcare provider, but it leaves it open. And finally, the patient. It also gives provision for revisions, similar to POST, and then the directions also section by section. Okay. So you see, it's kind of pushing the institutional envelope further toward their favor, and in my opinion, further away from the patient's interest. Again, the church has not made a definitive statement on this, so people can make an argument for or against. But I can tell you that once this document is signed, it goes into the chart, they're pretty difficult to remove, okay? All right, well, that brings us to the end with post and most.
Father?
The most controversial things going on right now. Monica, perhaps you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I had a question.
Give me a minute. I'm going to, let me raise the volume here locally. Okay, yes, go ahead, please.
Are these forms being used when patients are admitted to the hospital? Like, are these becoming like institutional policies where they want people to fill these forms out on every admission, or, you know, on the admission? And,
I see, upon admitting, right.
right.
Okay, again, my short answer is I don't know, but my intuition is that it depends on the institution. Since it's at the level of the institution, most likely, for example, at the Catholic and Mercy Hospital, they're not being used. But perhaps at Jackson, yes, being the county hospital, all right? So I think it goes from institution to institution or from system to system. It'd be interesting to see if the Baptist system, for example, in Miami-Dade County has institutionalized it in their admitting package. I don't know, but my intuition is that it's going to be institution by institution, okay? Yep.
Every patient who is admitted has to have a status, whether they're a full code or a DNR.
Okay.
Upon admission.
Okay.
Either to the nursing center or to the hospital.
Okay.
That it has. If they don't have their DNR signed already, then the physician has to establish that in reading a full code.
Okay, right, the default. All right, but maybe I didn't understand, Monica. If you were asking about post and most or any of the directives?
No, just post and most.
Okay.
I know the other ones. I know they address the DNR and the living will and all that. Most.
Yeah, I think those they do because it also covers the institution, right? It's exposure. They're trying to minimize exposure.
But with these being new, I didn't know if these are like required or.
No, I think as far as I know, they're not binding. Like, for example, we can look at post from Florida, right? Because it's a Florida document. As far as I know, it's not binding. Here's post. So this is like a sample from the state of Florida. But as far as I know, it's not binding. Okay. Somewhere it had the Florida thing. Let's see if it's at the bottom. Oh. Anyway. I don't see it now on the form.
I'll let you know next.
Yeah, right.
The Baptist system.
Right. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know the different systems. And my suspicion is this system by system. I don't see this being imposed yet because then what's the purpose? You know, it kind of, I think that HIPAA could make a case against this. A patient citing HIPAA could make a case against both, right? That is.
I think they just probably put it in place for the one who are critically ill. If there is no DNR status.
There you go. Okay, right. Yeah, but again, trying to project into the future, thanks be to God that we're all healthy here and now, you know, and we expect to be healthy tomorrow also. So how do we know if in years from now, what's our status going to be? What's the medical status? What's the status of the art of medicine years from now? You know, so this is a little too restrictive in my opinion, okay, for the patient. All right, so here we are at the end of today's lecture. So we have covered the issues on consent, right, with the package of advanced directives. First of all, with regards to consent, free and informed, and then also assigning a proxy or a surrogate. It's a wise thing to do. It's prudent, at least verbally have the conversation. And you can go one step further in writing. then that gets us into the directives, this package, advanced directives, which typically include a living will, a durable power of attorney, and a DNR. But each one of those three are also standalone documents. So it really all depends how far we can have the conversation with our loved ones to be proactive in this area. And then finally, the two controversial post and most. And thank you very much.
When did they started doing this post and most?
It varies. I think we picked it up in the radar maybe about 8 to 10 years ago. And it tends to be in the most progressive states, right? It's kind of a two-step to the euthanasia movement, or PAS. Again, the West Coast is very innovative about these things, but then what happens, New England doesn't want to get left behind. So then they pick it up. And I'm thinking out loud here with the National Catholic Bioethics Center, which I was affiliated more full-time when I graduated from Purdue. It was 2005, 2007. So around that time is when we picked it up on the radar, and this started coming up as a bioethical issue from the Catholic perspective. Yeah. So about a dozen years, more or less. Yeah. Okay, next week then we're going to get into nutrition and hydration, and including the case of Terry Schiavo, which I've mentioned several times and was a crucial case here in the state of Florida, and even nationally and internationally. So it'll be an interesting one and a heavy one, okay? So have a great week, and we'll see you next Saturday, God willing. Thanks again. Okay, thanks again, Monica.
Thanks, Father.
Bye. All the best. Bye-bye.